Welcome and thank you for coming tonight. This is a new format that we're trying, so please bear with us. This is our first time. We're very happy to have Richard back with his Livermore's historic South Side homes. The only thing that I have to warn you is I do have a dog, so he might like to Zoom bomb, but that's probably the only glitch I hope we will have tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Richard to begin his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea and Blanche. Like they said, this is a new experience for for all of us, and so I hope it works out well. We're going to go on a quick walk, about 45 minutes to an hour. And the good thing is, well, first the bad thing. The bad thing is you can't really see the buildings and walk around them, which we might do on a real walk. The good thing is you can wear your pajamas and slippers and you don't have to have an umbrella. So let's go on a walk. And the first thing we're going to do is define what a historic home is. And what the city uses, one is the house over 50 years old. And of course, that's getting to be a real problem since so many of the tract houses now are either over 50 or awful close to it. And so work is being done to revise some of the rules. But for us tonight, we're going to look at three things to determine if a house is historic or not. First one being because of the architecture. Is the architecture different, distinctive, and something that makes it stand out? Second thing is how significant is that house or home to the culture or the history of the area? And that might mean were some important documents signed in that house or important meetings done in that house. And then finally, the third thing is this house associated with people that were significant to the history of Livermore? And if the house is deemed to be of importance, and this doesn't mean that all houses have plaques, that's certainly not true. It's a long process to get a plaque. A lot of research has to be done. This is the last plaque that was awarded, and you can see that was in August of 2018. There's at least one that I know of that's being worked, but because of the COVID-19, that work has been slowing down. And so anyway, you'll see these plaques on many of the houses and also many of the buildings downtown. The plaque will tell about who lived in the house and what their importance to the area was. Or was the house, the architecture important to the area? And the first house we want to visit is the house that was built for Mary Anderson. Now, I've done a lot of work trying to research Mary Anderson, and I never found a Mary Anderson that lived in Livermore that would fit in with building a house in 1894. There are Mary Andersons that lived in the East Bay, but I can't tie any of them to this house. Who we do know that lived in the house was Daniel August Berry. Now, makes things kind of complicated. There were three Daniel August Berrys. The oldest one, who we'll call grandfather, he had a saloon that for whatever reason was way out of town. And it turns out way out of town in those days was at College Avenue in South Livermore, which is Lizzie Street in the old days. So he was the father then, the grandfather. The second Daniel Berry lived in this house with his family, and he owned a bar that was on South Livermore Avenue, right where the parking lot is now, that little parking lot for the Bankhead Theater. So that was, and it was called Dan's Place. Some of you will remember that. And then he also was a cigar maker, and he ran a hotel for a while. A lot of stories about him from the third Daniel Berry that I knew, who passed away a few years ago. And well, there's an interesting story that if we have time later on, we might talk about. And Dan Berry lived, there's a shed behind this house, if you're familiar with it. It's right next to the jail. And Dan slept in there for some reason. And he had a lot of stories then about the jail. Next house we're going to look at is the Frank and Annie Felon house. You'll recognize this house as being on 3rd Street, built in 1885. That Felon was a butcher. Even though Livermore was a very small town, you're going to see that a number of the people that had the more substantial houses were butchers. The house was built by Lewis Levy, who was a tailor, a Civil War veteran, and a saloon keeper. You're also going to notice there's a lot of saloon keepers mentioned in some of these better houses. As far as Civil War veterans go, over 100, you may not know, but over 100 Civil War veterans lived in the Tri-Valley. Next house we look at is that of Carl Clark. Carl was born at Midway, and this is not Midway Island. This is Midway, the little town, which if you go out Patterson Pass Road, up over the hills, you come into a tiny valley, and there's a big PG&E substation. Just north of that is where the town of Midway was. And Carl then was a manager of a hardware store, ran the Valley Garage, was a city inspector and a councilman, and finally was the mayor. Across the street from his is a house that a number of business people in town owned. Again, you can see one. The first one was a butcher, Heinz. The last one that's of interest to us is Croce. Croce, as many of you know, was a very, very important name in the history of Livermore. And Croce had a winery down the street from here. And the building was demolished, was it just last year? The Croce Winery. We get asked about a number of houses, and this is certainly one we get asked about a lot. And this is the Charles and Mary Beck house. That Charles was, well, he owned grocery stores, he owned a hardware store. He later owned one of the big commercial companies in town, the Livermore Commercial Company. He also at one time was a town trustee. His, let's see, for those of you that go to the Asbury Methodist Church, you might be interested that Charles and Mary Luella were married there in 1893. Now, Luella is kind of interesting in that she was the daughter of Daniel Inman, who was born in 1827 in Tennessee, died in Livermore in 1908. Daniel Inman was a very, very successful man, a businessman here in town, but he's perhaps best known as the founder of the town of Danville. Across the street is the David and Lucy Eminger house, built in 1909. Now look at as we go along, I would like you to look at the differences between houses that were made before 1900 and those that were made after 1900. A huge change in the architecture. So this is the Eminger house. It was built by Rasmussen and Bennett. And you're going to see a number of the houses that we're going to look at tonight were built by one of the Rasmussens. They were big contractors, builders here in the valley. Eminger then was a dry goods merchant. The house was later bought by Frida Wente Tubbs. You may know that George Tubbs was a mayor of Livermore at one time. And those of you who've been here for quite a while remember along Railroad Avenue, there was a place called Tubbsville. It was low income housing before there was such a thing a long time ago. The next house, many of you were going to know exactly where it was, and that's the Henry Callahan house out on East Avenue. When it was built, it wasn't called East Avenue, it was called Big Field Road, the big field being where the Lawrence Lab is now. And also see tonight that many of the sheep raisers, at least the more affluent ones, didn't live out on their farms, but they lived here in town. And Henry Callahan was certainly one of the most influential. And then his family went on to become very, very important in Livermore. He had a number of children, as shown in this photograph, lots of kids. And unfortunately, he died at a young age, but the family carried on and again became very important to our town. One of my favorite houses is the George and Susan Taylor house, built in 1888. This is on 5th Street. I'm sure a lot of you have driven by there many times. That George was a farm worker, a deputy sheriff, a town marshal, and a mail carrier. And the next owner, though, who maybe is a little more interesting, was Thomas Dewey. He married Elizabeth Veronica Doolin. Now, what makes him interesting is that he was a concrete contractor and best known for his sidewalks. And as you walk around the south side of Livermore, this is from like 4th Street all the way down to College, look at the concrete sidewalks, because all the old time concrete masons that built sidewalks had a stamp, and they would stamp in then their names, and many of them have dates, the dates. Jay Morris has walked around the South Side area, and he's found over 80 of the marks on the sidewalk. Some of them are really hard to read nowadays, but they're still there. Unfortunately, as the sidewalks crack and whatever, the old concrete, of course, is discarded, and so we lose a lot of that history. Elizabeth Doolin was part of the Doolin family that lived out on Doolin Canyon Road. So again, you see a lot of these names are all tied to each other one way or another. Another house that I really like, a nice little house built in 1888, is the Wilder house. Wilder also was a carpenter and a contractor. Now look at his house, 1888, and then look at this next house, 1887. And here is a person that had much more money apparently and built a really substantial house and was extremely important to the history of Livermore. And that's Frank Fassett. That he was a farmer, a teacher, a principal. He owned the Livermore Warehouse Company and the Independent Warehouse Company at different times. These were huge warehouses that hay and grain were stored in before they were shipped on the trains. So all along the train tracks in the old days, there were really large warehouses, quite a number of them. Frank went on then to be a member of the California Assembly, where he introduced a bill to provide for union high schools. And Livermore then became the first union high school in California. Frank became a trustee and clerk for the high school, and at one time was the vice president of the Bank of Livermore. Here's a picture taken about 1890 of his house, and it's hardly changed at all, very, very little change. And so the people that own it have done a great job. And you'll notice that with almost all these old houses, the owners have taken really tremendous care, put a lot of work, a lot of effort into maintaining them and keeping them right up to par. Next house we want to look at is the Frank Savage house. His wife was Elizabeth Wattenborough, and that's again an important name in the old the history of Livermore. And this is one of the larger houses in the old days. You see, it was quite large, although I understand it was added onto a couple times. But where that was exactly, I'm not sure, because it's you don't see additions like you do in some of the houses. Okay, Frank was a son of Silas Savage. Silas Savage owned this whole block, and as well as a lot of other real estate. And Savage, well, both of them were dentists. And if you remember, the old Livermore bicycle shop was on First Street, right next to the Bank of Italy, where the Independent is now. That Savage had his office up above. Next to that is the Carl Wood House. And we're trying to get a recognition, a plaque for this house. Again, in very, very good shape. If you could walk up on the porch, and I don't know if the owner would be too happy about that, but if you walk up on the front porch, there's a tremendous design in the shingles. And here on the front and on the side, you see they're all laid horizontal, but there's quite a really fancy design as you walk up the steps on the left. Okay, Carl Wood was an attorney here in Livermore, and then later became the Alameda County District Attorney. The Wood family over the years became very, very important in law in Alameda County, including being not only district attorneys, but also judges. The second owner was Henry Madsen, and he owned 2 butcher shops in town. Again, you got to think the population was just over 1,000, maybe 2,000, but he owned 2 butcher shops. Okay, down the street, down 7th Street, is the Thomas and Isabella Scott House, built in 1894. And Isabella is said to have been the first female attorney in Livermore. Now, I've been told that this house started life as a 1-story house, and then a 2nd story was added. And then finally, you can see off to the left, another addition was made. Okay, here's the house. Now, look how different the architecture is. And these houses aren't that much different in age. But this is a 1908 Jacob Van Buskert house. And he was a cabinet maker, house carpenter, and it was another one of our Civil War veterans. Then he sold the house then to John Luters. Luters is a very, very important name in the history of Pleasanton and Livermore. They were big farmers and were related then to the Hageman family. Now, some houses aren't necessarily really impressive architecturally, but were lived in, owned by people that were very important to the history of Livermore. And that's kind of the case here of the Leslie Wright house, that he was a constable, a motorcycle officer, a city engineer, the fire chief, building inspector, and he had electrical and bicycle businesses. He also was a farm surveyor. Now, another thing that made him kind of interesting to me was of the over 100 Civil War veterans, only, I can't remember offhand, but like 3 or 4 or 5 were served in the Confederacy. And Leslie's father then was in the Confederate military with the Virginia Cavalry. Now look, let's see, I don't know if you can see this. You can see my cursor going around. I don't know if you can or not. Whoop. Sorry, I hit the wrong button here. But anyway, I don't know if you could see the cursor. If you could see the cursor, where that
You can see
is,
it right there.
you can?
Yeah.
Okay, super. Okay, right there and over there are old hitching posts. And those were kind of neat. A lot of houses, a lot of stores downtown had these posts. And you see the big ring, and that's where you tie your horse up to. And so thank goodness these people were able to find those and put them in their yard. And again, most of the plaques you see are right by the front door. Some of them are on columns in front of the house, but most of them are on the front door. And all the plaques then have information then about the house and who lived in them and so on. And you can, some of the houses are, I'm not sure people want you opening their gates and walking in there, but downtown, a lot of the businesses have plaques, and you can certainly walk up to those and read what information is on there. Another one of my favorite houses is the Edward Lawson house over on J Street. And he was a druggist, and he took a lot of pictures. There's a lot of old time postcards that were made from photographs that he took, a lot of them from the air. On K, this is at K and 5th Street, was the Harold Anderson house. And notice who he's married to, Anna Feenan. Again, part of the Feenan family. Again, Livermore wasn't that big. And so, of course, all these families were married to each other one way or another. Okay, Harold managed a service station, was a merchant, and at one time was the mayor of Livermore. And Anna then was the daughter of Frank Feenan, who we saw down the road, and Annie McCormick. Both of these are really old, important Livermore names. Another one of my favorite houses is the Jacob or the Julius Jacobs house. And he'd married to one of the Reimers girls, the Reimers. And Reimer is a very important name in Livermore. One of the first mortuaries was Reimers. Okay, Julius was a soda manufacturer here in town, and it had a sad ending, which we won't talk about tonight. But he moved from Livermore then down to Santa Cruz. This house was built by Alman Weymouth. Again, one of the big builders. You see a lot of houses in Livermore were built by him. Okay, this house is not terribly exciting architecturally, but it's kind of an interesting house, at least to me. That the Zimmermans, you may or may not know, started out here in the valley up at Mountain House. If you go out Old Altamont Road, you'll come to Mountain House Road, and there's a store, a cafe, restaurant there, and that's where they started. Simon Zimmerman built that, and he made his money as a gold miner, and later then as the owner of the Mountain House Tavern, and there was also a hotel there. He had 9 children. Some of the children then ended up here in Livermore, and this is the house they lived in. And then nephew then, after the older ones had, that generation passed away, the nephew then took over the house, and he was also a miner. And he owned the Trevarno service station and auto court, which was kind of, I didn't know there were such things. So somewhere around where Trevarno is right now, I'm not exactly sure where that is, but he was a farmer and rancher and also the poundmaster. Okay, this is an interesting little house. This house was owned by Laughlin Moy. Now, Moy is another old name, very, very important to the history of the Livermore area. And he married Catherine Rowe, and Catherine's sister, Ellen, married James Concannon. And the house that's out at Concannon's is named for Ellen Rowe Concannon. Now, I'm not sure she ever was in that house, to be honest with you, but because it was, again, Dr. Gordon's house. Okay, the interesting thing about this house, it's said to have been moved all the way from Midway. And again, remember, Midway is over Patterson Pass Road into a different valley, a really super steep, very narrow road going from that little valley into the Livermore Valley. So how they got that over here, I'm not sure. But again, look at this house is in great shape. And it's estimated the house was built about 1870. Now, Laughlin was a farm laborer, and then he was in the butcher business for a while. And then in his later years, he was the gardener at Carnegie Park. The next house is Kelly. Kelly, again, an important name. He married Marianne Gallagher, again, a very, very important name in the history of Livermore. And again, he was one of the better off sheep raisers, in that he lived in town and had quite a substantial house. And you can see the house was built by Carl Rasmussen. Again, one of the many Rasmussen houses in town. And again, lots of Kellys. To this very day, there's a lot of Kellys and Gallagher descendants here in town. Okay, this house is said to have been built originally in 1885. It certainly doesn't look like an 1885 house. And so I have to wonder how many times it was modified. It, again, was said to have been built in 1885. And for Anton Leimeister, who married one of the Burnell girls. And that's, Burnell, of course, is a very, very important name here in the valley. And so they lived there for quite a while. Anton owned the Livermore flouring mills. There were a number of flour mills in Livermore in the old days, and he owned one of them then. And then let's see, the second owner was F.T. Gervanetti, and I can find very little about him. He might have been one of the Gervanettis from the Napa, Sonoma area. Okay, the next owner of interest to us certainly is Dr. Wallace Myers. Oh, thank you. I got some water. The Dr. Myers was part of the Myers family, and all along L Street from 5th to 6th Street, there's a number of houses that were built, designed and built by the Myers family. And the most important Myers brother was Henry Height Myers, who was a very, very well-known architect. And he designed many of the buildings in San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake, including many of the skyscrapers, office buildings, retail stores, factories, and then lots of warehouses all over the Bay Area. He also designed Highland Hospital, and he designed 10 Veterans Memorial buildings. So let's see, back to Myers then. Again, he was a doctor. And one of the things when we take people on walks, we ask them, is there anything different about this house? Excuse me while I take a drink of water. Thank you. Okay, let's go up, and I wish I'd taken this picture at a different angle. I want you to go up the walkway, and you notice the front door has a chair in front of it. You say, well, how in the world can they get in their house? Well, if you turned right, immediately turn right, there's another door. It's a smaller door. It's not as impressive as the door straight ahead of us, but it turns out that doctors, many of the doctors, had offices right in their homes. And so the big door, the main door, was for the family and for their friends, visitors, and so on. Patients of the doctor then would go through the smaller door into their office. So right in the front then was the office. And some people feel that Henry Height Myers redesigned this 1885 house for his brother, then did a lot of modifications when the brother bought it. So anyway, look for double doors, and there might have been a doctor there. So now let's go next door. And this is the Roy Bernard house. And he was owned a blacksmith shop, and at one time was the mayor of Livermore. Now this house was built by Samuel Bothwell, who was a contractor here in town and also on the city council. And I think most of you probably know where the Bothwell Center is on 8th Street. That was named after Samuel then. And his son also was a contractor. Okay, the next house is very interesting, and that's the Thomas Knox house. Thomas, besides the house being interesting, Thomas was certainly very interesting. He had a long, long list of occupations in community service. And I'm not going to read them all, but he was a vineyard owner, a contractor, a plasterer, a cement mason. He did many sidewalks. He was a postmaster, the county tax collector, chairman of the Livermore Cornet Band, city board of the trustees. In 1905, he's the one then, as the mayor, accepted the flagpole and blessed it as it was put up. Thomas was also the county chimney inspector and was a Livermore Union High School trustee and secretary of the Livermore Mutual Building Loan Association, and was a county supervisor at the time. Now, what's interesting about this house, it's said to have been the first house in Livermore that had stucco siding. And if you walk around the house, look at the pattern of the stucco. As you walk around, look at the stucco, and then on the other side then, on this, what would that be? The south side of the house. Look at the stucco. The stucco is different on each side. And it's said that when Thomas Knox was in the plaster cement business doing stucco work, that he used this house then as kind of a sample, that people would come over, look at the house, and see what kind of finish they wanted on their house. Okay, across the street is the Oscar Myers house. And after Myers moved out, it was the Presbyterian manse for a long time, from 1905 to 1956. Now, Oscar was a builder and a carpenter, and he was also a brother then of the architect Henry Myers. Okay, across the street, and I'm sorry for this faded out picture. I'm going to have to replace it. But this house is really, really important in the history of Livermore. And this was the Thomas Taylor Lily Myers house. Thomas was a clerk for the Ansbachers, who had the largest collection of big warehouses downtown. And they bought grain and hay, and they also had a number of retail stores. Now, William Taylor started his own company, W.H. Taylor Company, and then he is said to have been the person who sold the first automobiles in Livermore. Now, what's super interesting about this house to me is that this house, you notice the name Myers, the wife's name was Myers. Okay, she was the sister of Oscar and Henry Myers, and their father then Jacob Myers. Now, there's two different stories that I've heard. One is that the father, Jacob, and the other story is the brother Henry gave this house to Lily and Henry or William when they got married. So whatever, it's kind of interesting. Okay, this is a house as it looked shortly after it was finished. And you'll notice that a lot of the detail work is still exactly the same as when the house was built. What's different though is the fence out in front is gone and replaced with a different fence. And this picture, we're not sure when it was taken, but probably in the 1920s, 1930s perhaps. Okay, across the street and the next block down, there's a Wilson house, and Wilson was a coal miner. There were a number of coal miners who actually moved to Livermore then after they'd made some money in the coal mining business. And Wilson was a co-owner of the California Transfer Company and owned a building supply company. And when he passed away, then his wife Gertrude ran the building supply company for quite a while. And this house was another Rasmussen house built by Rasmussen, Carl Herman Rasmussen. And this is Owen's house. And again, a sheep raiser, must have been in pretty good shape, a very substantial house. And he was married to one of the Callahans. Charles was a fireman, a farmer, you know, Flynn Road out in the Altamont, and raising sheep and cattle. And he also was one of the founders of the Livermore Rodeo. And down the street a little bit farther is the William and Claudia Mitchell house. Claudia was a Twisselman. Twisselman, again, a very, very important name in the history of Livermore. William was a co-owner with Mitchell, with Wilson of the Mitchell and Wilson Drayman and Coal Company, and in later years then became a farmer. Oh, and this house too was built by Carl Herman Rasmussen. Okay, across the street is a house that I must have driven by, I don't know how many times, maybe hundreds of times probably. And it's kind of hard to see because there's a bunch of trees in front of it. But this house then at 679 South L Street was built in 1885 for the princely sum of $800. And it was built for William Thomas. Now, he lived there for a while and then moved down to the Hollister area. And I was contacted then by a woman who had a picture of a house, and she thought she about knew where it was. And she sent me the picture, which I'll show you in just a minute. And the house hasn't changed a whole lot in all these years. Okay, Alan was a farmer at one time, and he also was a sewing machine salesman for Singer and another sewing machine company, which I'm not familiar with, Wheeler and Wilson. Okay, this is the house that Alta Johnson had a picture of, wondering if the house was still in Livermore and where it was. We haven't been able to identify the little girl on the porch. And none of the family seems to match. So I don't know if she was a visitor or who she was. Okay, here's another house that's been restored in really tip-top shape. And it was owned by one of the major businessmen here in town, and that was Dennis Bernal. And Dennis was a direct descendant then of the Bernals, who at one time owned a large amount of land, not only in the Livermore Amador Valley, but also down in the San Jose area. And Dennis was really a go-getter. He owned a number of Livermore businesses. He was the developer of the town's power, light, and water systems. He owned a flour mill. He was the chief of police at one time. It was a civic leader. He owned the He owned the Livermore Brewery Company, which he made the claim had the purest and best beer in the entire United States. He also owned the Livermore Water and Power Company, which he sold to PG&E in 1904. And Dennis Burnell is the one who gave the light bulb to the fire department that's still burning after all these years. What is that? Almost 120 years old. So Dennis can trace his family way, way back to the early families. Now, his wife, Josephine, also goes way back. Her mother was Casimira Molina, and the Molinas, again, are very, very old Spanish family. And the daughter then of Dennis and Josephine, Ruth, married Francis McGlinchey. And again, McGlinchey's very, very old name here in town. Okay, next door is what may be the oldest existing house in Livermore. And there's an argument about how old this house is. One story is that it was built around 1860. And the other story is it was built around 1875. And both those are in books, and people swear that they had the right information. Okay, Thomas Hart was a vaquero for Robert Livermore. And later on then, he operated a tavern or saloon, whatever you, stage stop, called the Halfway House at one time, and the Highway House at another time. And that was directly across the street, best I can tell, from the pumpkin patch that's out by the freeway. Let's see, what is that called? G and H, whatever it is, the farm there anyway, right across the street from the pumpkin patch, right next to the arroyo. And in 1862, there was a huge flood that wiped all the buildings along the arroyo, wiped them all out. And so one story is that's when Thomas came to town and built his house. The other story is, no, he passed away and his wife actually built the house in 1875. Now, again, a lot of these houses were very small to start with, but you can see it was added onto and then added onto again. But again, very well kept. The house we probably get more questions about than any other house is this one. It's called the Twin Palms, and also people call it the Anspacher House. And it was built in 1888 for a cost at that time of $5,000, which is a tremendous amount of money. And again, I think I said the Anspachers were the largest owner of warehouses in Livermore, and they owned a number of other retail stores in Livermore, all along First Street. This house then was built for one of the sons, Philip Anspacher, but as far as I can tell, he never lived in the house. He either sold or gave the house to his sister, Emma, and she lived in the house for a long time with her husband, Samuel Seller. Samuel was a manager for Anspacher in their hay, grain, and lumber business. Okay, across the street, you'll recognize this little house. Well, it's not a little house. You'll recognize this house at the corner then of also of South L and College. And this is the house of a very, very important man in Livermore's history, Dr. William Stewart Taylor. Dr. Taylor was a physician here in the valley for 46 years, and he was way ahead of his time. He had a bacteriological laboratory in his home when many medical schools still didn't have one. And he's said to have owned the first car in the valley, which was a 1903 Haynes Apperson. He was written up in the paper as being a very fast driver, and he got in a lot of trouble because he'd take his car up to the unheard of speed of 35 miles an hour. William and Martha and all of their children except one were buried at the Oak Knoll Cemetery. And as far as I can tell, William was the last one buried there in 1931. Now, all of you are really up to speed now on houses. So the main door is right here. I should have walked over a little bit farther so you can see the main door is here. And then there's a door over here. So what is that door for? Well, what do you think that room was? So that must have been Dr. Taylor's office then. And so the patients would come in this door, and then the family and visitors would come in that door. Okay, moving right along, next door is the Dr. Jensen's house. Very, very large house, built 1934. And he was assistant supervisor or superintendent, and then finally director and superintendent of the Livermore Sanitarium. Okay, next to that is the house of Dr. John Robertson. And this is not the Dr. John Robertson who founded the sanitarium, but the son of that doctor, also John Robertson. And hopefully we're going to have a book written about the sanitarium, extremely important to the history of Livermore. At one time, the largest employer in the Livermore area with over 300 employees. They had their own farm, they had their own water system, really quite a big operation. And both the doctors were internationally known psychiatrists. Okay, again, a doctor's house, the main front door here, and over here then is the side door to the offices. Okay, next door was a huge building. It's huge now, but it was even larger because there were wings sticking out from either side. This building was moved, if you can believe that, from near what's now College Avenue and Mendenhall Drive. And it was originally a woman's dormitory for the Livermore Sanitarium. The sanitarium, you may know, was for folks that had alcohol, drug, and mental problems. And a very interesting building. We've been really super fortunate to be able to take two tours into that building. It's quite amazing how that building was picked up and moved there. And you can see right above the door, there's stained glass. And that wasn't even taken out when it was moved, and they didn't break any glass at all. Then later years, then it was used as the administration building for the, before the move, for the Pentecostal Bible College. Okay, as we're walking down College on our way back to Carnegie Park, where most of our, in fact, all of our walks start from, we were walking across the street from this house. Somebody said, "Do you know anything about that house?" And I said, "No, I honestly don't." And they said, "Well, that is a Sears house." And I said, "Sears house? What does that mean?" And well, that was a Sears modern kit house. And it turns out over 75,000 mail order houses were sold by Sears from 1908 to 1939, and about 400 different models. And these kits could weigh up to 25 tons, and they came in train cars, and they'd have up to 30,000 pre-cut parts, up to 750 pounds of nails. And Livermore is reported, and I haven't been able to verify this, so if any of you know anything about where verified Sears kit houses are, or in fact any other kit houses, because it turns out there were a number of companies. But I've been told there's kit houses not only along College Avenue, but also on South S Street, on Park and McLeod. And we're trying to verify that. Okay, down the street, I'm sure you've all driven by this house many, many times. This is the Jesse Bowles house. He was married to Martha Mendenhall. Martha was a sister of William Mendenhall, and that's the William Mendenhall that laid out the town of Livermore and owned all at one time all of the land from the railroad tracks all the way down to the college, well, to the Arroyo. And Jesse Bowles, interesting guy, in that he was he, like the Mendenhalls, also had farming and ranching property in Contra Costa County around San Ramon and Danville. Jesse was the first one to grow tobacco in Contra Costa County, and you may be surprised to know tobacco was also grown here in our valley. The next house is kind of a neat house, the Jacob Wagner house. He was a tanner, a farmer, and a carpenter. 1887 house. This house you've all been by. If you live in Livermore, one day or another, you have to drive by this house. And that's the Dr. McGill house, Dr. Henry McGill. And he was a physician, surgeon, dentist, and health officer. I got to retake this picture because, again, very impressive, big doors here in the front, but around the side, which I can't show you in the photo, but around the back side over here, you'll see there's another door facing the street, and that's where the patients went in. And you notice right here, here's a plaque then. Again, a lot of the plaques are on the pillars, if they have them, or they're by the front doors. Okay, we're just about done with our little walk. This house is really in super great shape too. This house was one of the few that I've found where the plaque actually is incorrect. This house is said to have been owned by the other Clark that lives on 3rd Street. As far as I could tell, he never lived here at all. Who lived here was Judge Manley Clark, and who was a judge, well, started out as a lawyer here in town, became the town attorney, and then eventually was a judge. Some of the people that I've talked to, he died in 1960, but some of the people I've talked to remember his wife, Eva. Okay, right next door is a house that caused some consternation and got some people kind of riled up, and that's the Ernest George Wente house. When I started researching this house, I found, oh, Ernest Wente lived in this house. And I told some people that, no, Ernest Wente never lived in that house. He always lived out on the ranch. There's no tiny way he lived there. I said, well, the deed shows that Ernest Wente lived there. Well, it turns out that this Ernest Wente was a nephew of Carl Wente. And this Ernest Wente came to America around 1904. And he lived with Carl. And he married one of Carl's daughters then, Ida Mae Wente, who turns out was a first cousin of his. Ernest became very, very successful, and he owned a couple of the very large warehouses down on near the train tracks, and also was a city councilman. Since the mid-1960s, the house has been owned by the Rasmussens. Mary Rasmussen is a direct descendant of early Tri-Valley pioneers, Jeremiah Fallon and Eleanor Murray. And you may know that we live in Murray Township. And so the Fallon name, Murray name, very, very important to the history of Livermore. Okay, next door to that house is the Savage house, Dr. Savage. We already talked a little bit about him. He was a dentist, a surgeon, physician, owned a lot of property. It was across the street from him then on across 6th Street, which was developed in 1908 then by his son and some others. We do have a picture at the Heritage Guild of that house. We don't have a date for it, but it looks pretty near the same, except the windows in the taller portion are completely changed around. Another neat house is this one, the Safford house. Very, very nice house. Interesting house. Look at the front door. It doesn't face um, either 6th Street or Livermore Avenue. It faces diagonally out. And that kind of reminds me then of the Valley Hotel down at L Street and 1st Street. And the new building there, they've done the same thing then. The front door then is kind of at an angle. Okay, the Daniel Murphy house is over on McLeod Street. Daniel Murphy married Mary McLeod, who was a daughter then of the McLeods. You may know that all the west side of 1st Street, of Livermore Avenue was laid out by Mendenhall, where the east side then was laid out by McLeod. And apparently they didn't get along very well, since the streets don't line up at all, and they're a heck of a mess. Okay, look at this house when it was restoration started in 1978. The people did a tremendous amount of work, an awful lot of work to bring it up to where it is now. And then just about the last house we're going to look at is the Buckley house. You may know that blind Boss Buckley, or blind, some people call him Blind Bill Buckley. I'm not sure why. But anyway, blind Boss Buckley was a political boss of San Francisco. And from what I've read, nothing happened in San Francisco unless he gave his permission. And you say, well, how could that be? He was a saloon owner, never had a political office at all. But if you didn't pay him, things didn't get done. Finally, he was run out of town, and he came to Livermore and lived here permanently. Originally, this was his summer house. His son actually graduated from Livermore High School. And here's a picture in 1898 of the house. Okay, the last house we're going to look at is the Dr. Cameron Gordon house. And that was originally at the corner, the northwest corner of 4th and K Street, across from the Presbyterian Chapel, across from Carnegie Park. And then was moved to the intersection of South Livermore and Tesla, and then eventually then was moved to where it is now. And they've done a tremendous amount of work restoring it. So anyway, I call it the Dr. Gordon House because he's the one that built and paid for it. But now it's called the Ellen Rowe Concannon Victorian House, and that's fine. They've done a great job fixing it up. And here's a picture of it then when it was on 4th Street. 4th Street's the street running right in front of us, right along here. And that's the end of the story. So I'm going to get out of this and give it back to Andrea and Blanche.
Thank you, Richard. There was one comment made in one of the houses that John Drummond mentioned, that actually you showed the house of Gary Drummond, who was the first Livermore historian. Yes,
that's absolutely true. Yeah, Gary and Anna lived there. Yes.
Yes. So that's notable. That's what's notable for that right there, that house.
Okay. We'll add that to the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if that's okay with John.
Yeah.
And we also and just had a really nice comment from Ricky, who said, "Thank you, excellent job, Richard." And
thank you.
There was a question regarding one of the houses that you showed. It was in 2210 4th Street. Someone asked if it was. Desiree asked if it was built for Yapia Beck.
Oh, the Beck house?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, what about it?
Was it built for?
Oh, built for Beck? Yeah, I believe it was. Not positive, but I believe it was.
That was the other question. And Is there any other questions that let's see if we have a couple here in chat. Let me see.
There's another question. Let's see. Will there be more webinars for other historical homes?
Should we put Richard on the spot now, guys?
Well, there's plenty of houses. There's lots of really neat houses. I think if somebody wants to take a walk, the largest concentration actually is from 5th Street to College on L and K. But there's many, many other houses, and we showed some of them tonight, but there's many more that we didn't show. And there's actually some houses on the north side of the railroad tracks that are really nice too, that should be explored more, that's for sure.
Richard, somebody asked if you could recommend a book about Livermore history.
Absolutely, absolutely. The book I recommend is the book by Ann Holman, Livermore A to Z. What's the name of it? Livermore Historic A to Z, I think it's called. I'm not sure. It's available at the Heritage Guild. I'm not sure how you'd get it now. Send the Heritage Guild an email, or maybe even call on their phone number and see how you might get a copy of it. But Ann did a tremendous job. That is really, really a great, great book. Really great. Oh, yes, and I might add another book. I'll put a little plug in. Another book people might be interested in is Vasco. And the Vasco book I helped Ann with. And that's a book of the caricatures that were at the old Hub Saloon, which was torn down when the street was straightened out at the intersection of First and what would that still be, South Livermore. There was where the Lizzie's fountain is now. There was a building there, and that was the hub. Anyway, these pictures were in there, and so we have a picture of many of the, well, a caricature of many of the people that were really important to the history of Livermore, including, I think, a couple of people that we show their houses of tonight.
And Richard, is there a walking map that people can use? Somebody asked that question.
Yeah, there is at the Heritage Guild, but again, since the Heritage Guild is closed and now with these tighter restrictions, I don't know when it'll be open again. But there's a couple, and I'm thinking about making another one. The ones that are down there now show the downtown area more. I don't think get too far out into the residential area, but yeah, they're very good. But I think they could be expanded upon.
Yes, and Richard, we also had a question about if you are going to be doing any research on other areas of town, and someone was particularly interested in the Max Baer home.
Okay, I don't know anything about that. Yeah, people send me queries, and that's where a lot of the information comes from. People send me query. Since I'm the city historian, I get a lot of queries, and I go after them and I try to find out, what I can. And so Max Baer, I'll put that on the list.
Richard, where do you start if you were just somebody who doesn't really know a lot about historical research and you saw a house that you were interested in knowing more about? Like, where would a person start looking into something like that?
Well, one place, and again, we can't do it, would be right at the Heritage Guild. At the Heritage Guild, we've got all kinds of old maps and charts. We've got tax records, and if it was a prominent person, we even have photographs of their house. But the tax records, I think, and the in census records would get you off to a good start. And then there's something called the Bunshaw Index, which is that the library has a copy of, as does the Heritage Guild. And the Bunshaw Index, if you knew the name of the person that lived in the house, you could look in there and you could find out an awful lot about the person that lived there, being directed by the index then to the newspapers. And Barbara Bunshaw put the index together, actually said not only what newspaper, what date, but also what page and even what column to look at.
We have another question about about Mr. Van Buskirk. What did he do in early Livermore?
Okay, let's see. Let me scroll down to Mr. Van Buskirk's house. It's here. Let's see, you can't see this, I assume? Can you see anything, or what's on your screen? It just says Livermore Public Library?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, on my other screen, I have information on him, that he was a cabinet maker, house carpenter, and also of interest to me is he's a Civil War veteran. Along with my cousin Peter Kitchenham, who actually lives in Livermore, or excuse me, in London, but has been to Livermore probably a half a dozen times. When Peter came to Livermore, he got so excited about Livermore history. And I said, "You're from London. Why are you excited about Livermore?" And he got really happy. And so he's helped me with a lot of research. So between the two of us, then we've researched these Civil War veterans, and I hope to put out a book on them someday. And I also might say that we hope to put out a book on the plaques and where they are and why they were given. And that's being processed right now. Hopefully in the next year, we'll get that out. So anyway, another Civil War veteran. And again, I might say a lot of the names, in fact, I'd say almost all the names that I mentioned tonight, I have in a huge database. Oh gosh, I don't know how big that is now. It's around 42,000 names of people that lived in Livermore and their descendants. And so if somebody was interested in Van Buskirk, for instance, we could look in there and see what we have. If we don't have a lot of information and somebody's interested, then that's when I start looking again. And I might say there's a couple of websites that are available. One's available at the library when it's open, and that's the ancestry.com. If you know people's names and about where they lived in Livermore, you can look at census records and maybe, if you're super lucky, even find a family tree. And the other one that anybody can get from home is Family Search from the Mormon Church. Tremendous amount of information in both of those.
And Richard, we have a question about the house that's on the corner of Hillcrest and East Avenue. And the question is that historical? And it says it's like a large farm-like space?
Yeah, I don't. Obviously, that house goes back, but offhand, I don't have any information on that. I'm sorry to say. But I ought to put that on my list too.
I see you come and do this and you get more work, Richard.
Yeah.
Do we have other questions? Great presentation. People have been saying that a lot in the comments.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoy doing this. And if anybody has questions on any of these families, please let me know. And I'll see what I can do to help out. And they may be able to add an awful lot of information. Oh, Blanche, do we have just a few minutes?
Yes.
Okay, let me tell you. I got to tell you the story that Dan Barry told me. I get a kick out of it. And when we take the kids on the third grade walks downtown, we walk by the old city hall, and then we go down McLeod Street, and we stop in front of the jail, the old city jail. Then right next to that is, and that's a place you ought to go into. The super nice lady has a interior decorating store there. In fact, she and her husband are the ones that own the Berry House now and have restored it. Very nice. And a lot of the old bars and whatever from the jail are still in the jail. So there's still a touch of jail to it. But anyway, what Mr. Berry told me, that when he was a young man, for some reason, he didn't live in the house with a family, but right next, if you walk down McLeod Street, right next to the jail is a shed. And unfortunately, the shed's kind of going south. It's kind of falling down, but hopefully it was in much better shape when he lived there. So Mr. Berry lived in his bedroom then, was in this shed. And then he said the problem was on Friday night, Saturday night, sometimes Sunday night, Livermore, the constable would pick up the drunks and put them in the men's jail. And he said they'd swear and cuss and bang on the walls until about midnight, then they'd go to sleep. And then finally, then Mr. Berry could go to sleep. And then after some time, there got to be a lot of women that were in trouble for one reason or another, mainly drunkenness. And so behind that jail that we see from McLeod Street was a woman's jail. And I said, oh, so when they put women in there, that must have been good, because then the men would try to calm down and not be so vulgar and make so much racket. And Mr. Berry kind of laughed and he said, no, he said, just the opposite. He said, the women were terrible. They cuss and scream all night and swear. And he said he had to guess that the men in the men's jail learned words that they'd never even heard before. That he said some of those women were really something.
Oh, and Richard, there was also a thank you went out to Wanda for helping you out on this.
Oh, I thank her for the water. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, we didn't have to get wet, and we could do this in our pajamas.
And if anybody tried to attend, Richard actually gave this presentation in January at the library, and he broke all the attendance records there when he did it. So this is much easier. We don't have to find chairs for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, and change rooms.
We had a couple hundred people at that talk.
Yeah.
So Richard, you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Glad to do it.
Thank you so much, Richard. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks everyone for attending. Say it was our first one, so thank you for also putting up with our little glitches. We appreciate it.
And we
hope to see everyone soon.
We had questions about whether it would be rebroadcast, and we did record it. So once we figure out how we can make it available, maybe on YouTube or somewhere, we'll definitely post the recording of the webinar.
Okay, super. Thank you. People have been asking me that too. Thank you.